Imagine you are an Ottoman diplomat in the year 1459. You are a man of power, representing the most feared empire on earth. You have just arrived at the court of a minor prince in a wild, forested land called Wallachia. His name is Vlad. But you call him Dracula. You are here to deliver a simple message from the Sultan himself: pay your tribute, or face the consequences. You stand before him, confident, arrogant. As a sign of respect for your own faith, you refuse to remove your turban. The prince, Vlad, smiles. It is not a warm smile. It is a smile that makes the winter air feel even colder. He asks you why you defy his court's customs. You explain your religious tradition. Vlad nods, as if he understands. Then he says 4 words that will echo through eternity: then let me strengthen your faith. He gives an order. His guard seize you. They hold you down. And they begin to nail your turban to your skull. Slowly. This was not an act of war. It was a message. A message to the most powerful man in the world that a new kind of monster had been born on the frontier of his empire. This was the day the world learned that what Vlad the Impaler did to his enemies was worse than death. This is the story of his unspeakable acts. To understand the monster, you must first understand the boy. Vlad Dracula was not born evil. He was forged in the crucible of betrayal and suffering. As a child, he and his younger brother, Radu, were given as political hostages to the Ottoman Sultan. For years, they were prisoners in a gilded cage. While his handsome brother Radu adapted, becoming a favorite of the Sultan and converting to Islam, Vlad resisted. He was defiant, proud, and frequently punished for his insolence. He watched the Ottoman machine up close. He studied their tactics, their culture, their cruelty. But most importantly, he learned their greatest weakness. They understood the fear of death, but they did not understand the terror of a fate worse than death. He was a prisoner, learning the art of terror from his own captors. When he finally returned to Wallachia to claim his throne, he was no longer a boy. He was a survivor. His heart was a block of ice, filled with a cold, burning hatred for the empire that had stolen his childhood, and for the local nobles, the boyars, who had betrayed and murdered his father and older brother. He was a prince with no allies, surrounded by enemies on all sides. He knew he could not defeat them with armies. He did not have the numbers. He would have to defeat them with something far more powerful. He would have to defeat them with fear. Vlad's first act as prince was not to fight the Ottomans. It was to cleanse his own house. He invited hundreds of the boyars, the noble families who had betrayed his father, to a grand Easter feast. It was a banquet of reconciliation. He offered them wine and food, asking them in detail how many princes they had seen reign and die. Their arrogant answers revealed just how many of them had participated in the endless cycle of betrayal that kept Wallachia weak. When the feast was over, and the nobles were drunk and content, Vlad's smile vanished. The doors were barred. His soldiers entered. This is where the story begins. According to the historical chronicles, the older nobles were seized immediately. Right there in the feasting hall, they were impaled on sharpened stakes. Their dying screams replaced the music. But for the younger, healthier nobles and their families, he had a different plan. He marched them, still in their fine Easter clothes, 50 miles through the mountains to a ruined castle. There, he forced them to work as slaves, rebuilding the fortress with their bare hands. They worked until their expensive clothes fell off their backs and their soft hands were raw and bleeding. They worked until they died of exhaustion and starvation. The castle they built became known as Castle Dracula. It was a fortress built not just of stone and mortar, but of noble blood and princely revenge. The message was clear. Betrayal would not be forgiven. This was a new kind of ruler. Vlad Dracula did not invent impalement. But he perfected it. He turned a brutal method of execution into a gruesome art form. A psychological weapon of mass destruction. For him, impalement was not just about causing pain. It was a symphony of terror. He learned from his Ottoman captors that there were different methods. A stake could be driven straight through the heart for a quick death. Or, with surgical precision, it could be inserted through the rectum and carefully guided through the body to avoid vital organs, exiting through the mouth or shoulder. This was his preferred method. A victim could survive in unimaginable agony for hours, sometimes days, suspended between heaven and earth on a wooden spike. They were a living, screaming warning. Vlad didn't just kill his enemies. He turned them into monuments of his wrath. He arranged the stakes in geometric patterns. Circles, rows, concentric rings. The highest stake for the man of highest rank. He created entire landscapes of death. He was not just a prince. He was a director, and the stage was his kingdom. He was showing the world that his cruelty was not random. It was calculated. It was intelligent. It was an art. In 1462, the Sultan, Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who had conquered Constantinople, decided he had had enough of his defiant vassal. He led a massive Ottoman army, perhaps 90,000 strong, into Wallachia to crush Vlad once and for all. Vlad's army was tiny in comparison, less than 30,000 men. He could not win in a pitched battle. So he did not fight one. He turned the entire landscape into a weapon. He burned villages, poisoned wells, and created marshes to slow the Ottoman advance. He waged a campaign of guerrilla warfare and terror, striking at night, using his knowledge of the land to appear and disappear like a phantom. He even went so far as to dress his own men as Ottoman soldiers to infiltrate and sow chaos in their camps. But his masterpiece of terror was waiting for them near the capital city of Targovist. As the Sultan and his army marched forward, a horrifying sight began to emerge from the mist. It was a valley, stretching for 3 kilometers, filled with sharpened stakes. This was the infamous Forest of the Impaled. 20,000 captured Ottoman soldiers and Bulgarian collaborators were impaled. Men, women, and even children. The stakes were arranged in neat, orderly rows. A grotesque garden of death. Vultures circled overhead, and the air was thick with the stench of decay and the lingering sound of dying moans. Even the Sultan, a man who had seen the slaughter of Constantinople, a man hardened by a lifetime of war, was so horrified by the sight that he recoiled in shock. His own chroniclers wrote that he said, "I cannot win against a man who does such things." He did not attack the city. He turned his army around. Vlad had not defeated the Ottoman army. He had defeated the Ottoman mind. The German and Russian chronicles, which tended to sensationalize Vlad's cruelty, are filled with stories that blur the line between man and monster. One of the most famous tales alleges that Vlad so relished the sight of his impaled victims, he would often set up a table amidst the stakes and dine there. He would eat his bread, drink his wine, and listen to the symphony of suffering around him, sometimes even dipping his bread into the blood of his victims. Is this story true? It is almost certainly an exaggeration, a piece of propaganda designed to paint him as a demonic, blood-drinking ghoul. But the power of the story is not in its literal truth. It's in what it represents. It captures the essence of his psychological campaign. He wasn't just killing people, he was demonstrating a complete and total mastery over the concept of human suffering. He was showing his enemies that the things they feared most, pain, death, desecration, were his entertainment. He was communicating a simple, terrifying message: I am not like you. Your rules of morality and fear do not apply to me. How can you possibly defeat a man who dines amongst the dead? Vlad's cruelty was not reserved for his external enemies. He saw weakness within his own kingdom as a cancer that had to be cut out. One story tells of his method for dealing with poverty. He invited all the poor, the sick, and the vagrants of his capital to a great hall for a feast. They came, grateful for the prince's charity. They ate and drank their fill. When the meal was over, Vlad appeared before them and asked, "Do you wish to be without cares, lacking nothing in this world? They cheered, shouting yes. Vlad ordered the hall to be boarded up from the outside and set on fire. He burned them all alive. His reported justification was chillingly pragmatic. He claimed he had done it so that they would no longer be a burden to other men, and so that no one in his land would be poor. This act, if it happened, reveals the core of his philosophy. It was a twisted, utilitarian form of justice. He was not just a sadist, he saw himself as a surgeon, cutting away the diseased parts of society to make the whole stronger. He was willing to commit unspeakable acts in the name of order and stability. Through these acts of unimaginable terror, Vlad achieved something remarkable: absolute order. Wallachia became a land almost entirely free of crime. The chronicles tell a story, likely a legend, that illustrates this. To prove the effectiveness of his rule, Vlad placed a golden cup on a public well in the middle of his capital city. It was made of solid gold, exquisitely decorated. Anyone could drink from it. But it was completely unguarded. Throughout his entire reign, the golden cup was never stolen. Not a single person dared to touch it. The fear of his punishment was so absolute, it was more powerful than any police force. This was the paradox of Dracula's rule. He was a monster, a tyrant, a sadist. But to the law-abiding common folk, he was a hero. He was the prince who had finally brought justice and order to a land torn apart by corrupt nobles and foreign invaders. He was a demon who had brought them peace. They did not love him. They feared him. But in a land of wolves, sometimes only a dragon can keep you safe. In the end, it was not the Ottomans who brought Vlad down. It was betrayal, once again. His own cousin, the King of Hungary, lured him into a trap and imprisoned him for over a decade. His brutal methods had made him too many enemies, and his allies grew tired of his extremism. It was during this imprisonment that the legend of Dracula truly began. The printing press had just been invented, and pamphlets detailing his horrific acts became bestsellers across Europe. German texts, in particular, painted him as a blood-drinking, inhuman monster, exaggerating his deeds to create a sensational villain. They were the first horror stories. When he was finally released and retook his throne for a final, brief reign, he was a man out of time. The world had changed. His methods were no longer seen as necessary, but as barbaric. He died in battle in 1476. The exact circumstances of his death are a mystery. The Ottomans claim they killed him, cut off his head, and sent it to the Sultan in Constantinople as proof that the Impaler was finally dead. His body was gone, but his story was just beginning. These German pamphlets would eventually find their way, centuries later, into the hands of an Irish author named Bram Stoker. Stoker would read about the Prince of Wallachia who dined among the dead, who terrorized his enemies, and who seemed to be something more than human. He would combine this history with the folklore of vampires. And in doing so, he would make Vlad the Impaler immortal. So who was Vlad the Impaler? Was he a monster or a hero? A sadist or a savior? The answer is, he was all of them. To the Ottomans, he was a demon. To the boyars, he was a tyrant. But to many Romanians, even today, he is a national hero. The ruthless father of their nation who did what had to be done to secure their freedom. His story is a chilling reminder of a dark truth: sometimes, history is not shaped by good men. It is shaped by monsters who fight for the right side. It is shaped by men willing to commit unspeakable acts for a cause they believe is just. We are horrified by his methods, but we cannot deny his results. He took a weak, divided land and forged it into a nation through sheer terror. He held back the tide of the most powerful empire on earth, not with armies, but with an idea so terrifying that it has haunted our nightmares for over 500 years. The man is dead. But Dracula, the dragon, the idea of a terror so absolute that it creates order. That idea will never die. It is a warning, etched in blood and fear, that when the world is plunged into chaos, it is the monsters who often rise to save it.